Katherine Janeiro grew up in a loving home in the North York section of Toronto. She was the only child of Dinora and Fernando Janeiro, who had immigrated to Canada from Portugal. She was a happy, intelligent, and active child. In school, she was a straight-A student who won spelling bees, ran track and field, and sang in talent shows. Things started to change for Katherine when she was 16 and ran away from home with a boyfriend. The couple moved to Barrie, Ontario, a little over an hour's drive away from Katherine's family home. A little over a year later, Katherine gave birth to their daughter Dawn. Katherine and her boyfriend separated late in the summer of 1993, when Dawn was 1. After the separation, Katherine and Dawn moved into a basement apartment on Dunlop Street West in Barrie. Katherine's parents asked her to move back home with them, but she turned down the offer, telling them that she wanted to stay in Barrie to be close to her friends. Those friends may not have been worth staying in town for. According to Katherine's cousin, Rex Merrow, she had fallen in with the wrong crowd, following her separation from her boyfriend. While Katherine would always help others who were going through a difficult time, she could not help herself. Katherine was very active in Barrie's bar scene and was out drinking on Sunday, October 9th, 1994, staying out until the early morning hours of October 10th, which was Thanksgiving in Canada that year. She went out to bars in downtown Barrie before inviting several of the people she had met at the bars back to her apartment. Just before 8 o'clock on Monday night, October 10th, 20-year-old Katherine's body was discovered on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by blood, by some of her friends. Her autopsy would find that she had died of multiple stab wounds and had sustained several scratches to her face. Dawn was thankfully not at the apartment at the time of the murder, as she was spending the holiday weekend with her grandparents. She remained in their care after her mother's death. The Barrie Police Service originally led the investigation into Katherine's murder, receiving support from the Ontario Provincial Police's Forensic Identification Bureau. Physical evidence was collected and sent to the Centre for Forensic Sciences in Toronto and to a private lab. Numerous interviews were conducted. Katherine had ties to the local drug trade, and a theory in the case was that robbery had been the motive for the murder. Katherine's telephone had been ripped from the wall and was missing from her apartment, leading authorities to speculate that her killer may have taken it because their contact information was stored in the phone's memory. The phone was eventually discovered in a creek near Katherine's apartment building. While the memory was somehow still intact, it did not reveal any important information. Police identified 6 suspects they believed participated in or had knowledge of the crime, but could not prove that any one of them was Katherine's killer. In October of 1999, the case was turned over to the Ontario Provincial Police so that they could use an unspecified investigative technique in the case that the Barrie Police Service did not have access to. This technique was never able to identify Katherine's killer, and the case was transferred back to the Barrie Police Service in February of 2012. While decades passed without an arrest in the case, this was not because of a lack of effort from the police in Barrie. Experts in various scientific and law enforcement fields in both Canada and the United States were consulted on the evidence in the case. More than 350 witnesses were interviewed as a part of the investigation. In 2014, Barrie Police Detective Rob Gravel stated that he believed he knew the identity of the killer. He claimed that the man was local and that he was keeping tabs on him. He hoped that he was close to finally being able to make an arrest in the case. 2 men were under police surveillance in connection with the case at the time. Police optimism in the case was largely due to continuing improvements in DNA technology. DNA had been found at the crime scene, but the various sources of it had become mixed. Technology was advancing to the point where they hoped that different profiles could be isolated and separately identified. Police held a press conference in October of 2014 following the 20th anniversary of Katherine's murder, discussing their ongoing investigation. Katherine's daughter, Dawn Nelson, was present at the press conference, but Katherine's parents, Dinora and Fernando, were absent, as they had both passed away. Their daughter's death was devastating to them, and they both became extremely depressed following it. Later in their lives, they both developed cancer. Dinora died in May of 2012, and Fernando died in January of 2014. They're both in a better place right now, reunited with my mother, but it was a tough way to get there, Katherine's then 22-year-old daughter Dawn said at the press conference. Now I stand alone, holding on to the hope that there will be justice in my mother's case. I hope to one day have closure to what has caused me so much pain. It would be more than another 6 years before that day finally came. On January 13th, 2021, 58-year-old Robert Bruce McQueen was arrested in the south end of Barrie and charged with Katherine's murder. The name Robert Bruce McQueen was not necessarily well known in Barrie, but his alias, Bruce Ellis, was. He had begun using his stepfather's last name of Ellis, rather than his birth name of McQueen, following his mother's remarriage when he was young. According to individuals who grew up with McQueen and spoke to the press following his arrest, the person they knew as Bruce Ellis had a reputation as someone you did not want to mess around with. He was a tough guy, prone to violence, who never finished high school because he was in and out of jail so frequently. As an adult, he worked various odd jobs, mainly in construction. Due to the ongoing legal case against McQueen, many specific details about the evidence against him have not yet been released to the public. According to police, McQueen's arrest was made following a tip about him they received in 2019. It has not been revealed if DNA or any other physical evidence ties him to the murder. Police say that Katherine and McQueen knew each other, but have not provided further details on what their relationship was. It is unclear if McQueen was one of the original 6 suspects identified in the case, or one of the 2 men under surveillance in 2014. Barrie Police Communications Coordinator Peter Leon has only specified that McQueen was known to investigators. Due to the pandemic, McQueen's first 2 court appearances, on January 14th and 21st, 2021, have been held via video conference. At his second appearance, he said he did not yet have a lawyer to represent him, but believed he would have one secured by the end of that day. His next court appearance is scheduled for January 28th. The first-degree murder charge against McQueen has not yet been proven in a court of law. Following McQueen's arrest for her mother's murder, Dawn Nelson released a statement through the Barrie Police Service. "I want to thank those who never gave up hope in looking for my mother's murderer," she said in it. "I wish my grandparents, Dinora and Fernando Janeiro, were alive to see this day. Grief is the most familiar feeling to me. Closure on my mother's case will help to finally bring me some peace." On July 5th, 1966, around 2 p.m., a young couple entered Roper's Motel in Pecos, Texas, some 200 miles east of El Paso. The girl was believed to be between 17 and 20 years old, with an olive complexion and dark hair. She was approximately 5 feet 4 inches tall and 120 pounds. She was dressed in a flower-patterned shirt and dark-colored shorts. The man with her was slightly older, approximately 25 years old, with blonde hair and an average build. He was estimated to be around 5 feet 7 inches tall. The couple registered at the motel as Mr. and Mrs. Russell Batoon. 3 hours after they checked into their room, while the man was taking a nap in the room, the young woman went out to go swimming in the motel's pool. No one else was swimming at the time. The 16-year-old granddaughter of the motel's owner then heard screaming coming from the pool area. When she reached it, she saw the young woman unconscious in the pool. She pulled her from the water and began attempting to resuscitate her. An ambulance was called, and the young woman was taken to the hospital, but she was declared dead when she arrived. Her death certificate would list her cause of death as drowning. After the man who had been traveling with the young woman was informed of what happened, he left the motel. He convinced motel staff to let him take the registration card for the room with him, claiming he had no other form of identification to use when he reached the hospital. However, he never went to the hospital to inquire about the young woman he had been traveling with, and had told motel staff was his wife. He was last seen driving a late model sedan, but left town and was never seen again after he left the motel. He took all of his and the young woman's belongings with him. Authorities had no means of identifying the man, who had not used his real name to register at the motel. Russell Batoon was a real person, but he was a Marine stationed in North Carolina, and no connection between him and the unidentified couple using his name could be made. Without any of her belongings, authorities had no clues to follow to try to identify the young woman. Unable to determine her identity or locate her family, the citizens of Pecos collected money to pay for a funeral and proper burial for her. She was buried in Fairview Cemetery, her grave marker simply reading, "Unknown girl, drowned July 5, 1966. Local citizens and law enforcement officials working on her case have continued to bring flowers to her grave throughout the years. The Pecos Police Department's commitment to identifying their Jane Doe did not diminish over the years, and eventually they began searching for new resources in their effort. On August 27, 2019, Jane Doe's remains were exhumed so that new forensic techniques could be utilized in her identification. Authorities worked with the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification to record her dental information in NamUs and perform initial DNA testing. In 2019, police also partnered with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who released a new artistic rendering of what the young woman looked like when she was alive. They hoped that someone would recognize the young woman in the image after it was disseminated to the public through the media. The image was created using Polaroids of the young woman's body that had been found in the archives of the funeral home that had handled her funeral. In August of 2020, the young woman's remains were taken to Othram, a private DNA lab in the Woodlands, Texas. They extracted DNA from one of the bones and developed a DNA profile. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children then began coordinating an effort to try to identify the young woman using genetic genealogy. Innovative Forensic, a genetic genealogy firm based in Virginia, donated their service to the investigation. After uploading the DNA profile to Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch, they were eventually able to find potential distant relatives of Jane Doe. Authorities then visited someone they believed to be a close relative of Jane Doe based on this information, who provided them with a DNA sample. Comparing their DNA to that of the unidentified young woman who had drowned in Texas more than 5 decades earlier, they were finally able to identify her. On January 19, 2021, Pecos City Police Department Police Chief Lisa Tarango held a press conference and announced that the young woman had been identified as Jolaine Hemmy. Authorities had visited one of her sisters in Kansas the week before to inform her of the identification. Jolaine was one of 15 children and grew up outside of Salina, Kansas. "We had wonderful parents and lived on a little farm just east of town. Not extremely rich people, but we were rich with our family," according to her brother Paul. She was 17 years old and working at a drive-in diner when she abruptly disappeared in early July 1966 without even collecting her most recent paycheck. According to the Hemmy family, a young man had been paying extra attention to Jolaine just prior to her disappearance, but they did not know his identity or have any evidence that she had left town with him. Jolaine's family worked extensively with law enforcement, trying to find her, but never located her. 5 of Jolaine's siblings, as well as both of her parents, died without knowing what became of her. Her mother never gave up hope that Jolaine was still alive, and spent every Mother's Day waiting for Jolaine to call her. Jolaine's remains are going to be sent to Kansas so that she can be laid to rest next to her parents. While the mystery of the identity of the Pecos Jane Doe has finally been solved, the investigation into her death is still open and active. While she may have drowned accidentally, circumstances like the reported screams and the suspicious behavior of the man traveling with her have led to police continuing to investigate the manner of her death. Police have been unable to locate Jolaine's autopsy file, which could contain important information about any injuries she may have sustained. They particularly hope to be able to identify and speak with the man who was traveling with Jolaine so they can learn more about the circumstances that brought her to Texas and surrounding her death.